The New York skyline stretched endlessly, glittering under a heavy moonless sky. The wind was humid tonight, carrying the tang of the East River and the faint smell of exhaust from the streets below. Perched on the lip of a water tower, Spider-Man knelt, with his head bowed, fingers digging into the metal as though it might hold him together. The mask hid most of his face, but the twitch in his jaw and the ragged rhythm of his breathing betrayed the truth. Something inside him was breaking. Weeks earlier, he'd stood in Dr. Mariah Crawford's lab, staring at test results that confirmed his worst fear. His DNA, altered by the original spider bite, was still mutating. He'd fought Morbius to exhaustion, nearly becoming prey himself. And he'd been here before, spiraling toward the monstrous form Kraven had once helped him reverse. Back then, the transformation into the man-spider had been temporary, a nightmare narrowly avoided. This time, it felt inevitable. The serum he'd worked on for days was supposed to halt the changes, to stabilize his genetic code. Instead, it had lit the fuse. It began with the itching, a deep crawling irritation in his sides that felt like something alive was moving under his skin. Then came the heat, a fever so intense it made his vision blur. The first spasm knocked him forward onto his hands and knees. He clawed at his costume, nails tearing fabric as the pain sharpened into a violent tearing sensation. In a moment of unspeakable horror, the skin at his ribs split, and from the gash erupted two slick, muscular limbs, arms fully formed, twitching like newborn predators. The scream that tore out of him was raw and almost inhuman, echoing across the rooftops. They moved without his consent, curling into fists, flexing with power he could feel in his spine. His other arms, the ones he'd had all his life, trembled as if suddenly outclassed. No, this can't be happening again, he muttered, though the words came out slurred, distorted, a rasp that didn't sound like his own voice. He didn't have time to process the horror before a voice from below barked his name. Not Peter, not even Spider-Man, but Spider. The voice was cold, measured, and unmistakable. Frank Castle. The Punisher stood in the glow of a street lamp, his trench coat swaying in the wind, rifle raised and locked. The last time they'd crossed paths, it had been during the Morbius affair, when Castle had been all too eager to label him a blood-drinking monster. Seeing him now with two extra arms jutting from his torso, there would be no convincing him otherwise. "I warned you, freak," Castle growled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "This ends tonight." The first shot shattered brick inches from Peter's head, spraying dust across his lenses. The sound split through his skull, sending his already frayed nerves into overdrive. He leapt from the water tower with reflexes faster than thought, landing on the rooftop opposite Castle. "Wait, you don't understand." The words came out wrong, guttural, like an animal trying to mimic human speech. Castle's eyes narrowed in disgust. "Don't bother talking." He fired again. Instinct took the wheel. Peter moved in a blur, the new arm slamming into Castle's chest and pinning him to the wall. The force of the blow drove the air from Castle's lungs, and before Peter could even realize what he was doing, he'd shoved him backward, too far. The sound of boots scraping uselessly against the rooftop edge, the flash of panic in Castle's eyes, and then the sickening final thud of a body hitting the alley below. Peter landed beside him in seconds, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Castle lay still, his head at an unnatural angle, eyes wide but unseeing. No, I didn't mean... Peter's voice cracked. But then, beneath the wave of nausea and grief, another feeling wormed its way in. A hollow, shameful relief. The threat was gone. He didn't have to run from Castle anymore. That thought hit harder than any bullet could. He backed away, breathing hard, each step echoing in the empty alley. Above, sirens began to howl in the distance, weaving through the wail of the city like a death knell. He pulled his mask back into place and fled into the night, though a part of him knew there was nowhere left to run. The sun rose without warmth the next morning. A heavy fog rolled off the East River, swallowing the jagged lines of the skyline. In a cramped newsroom at the Daily Bugle, J. Jonah Jameson slammed a fresh edition onto his desk so hard the coffee in his mug splashed over the rim. The headline screamed in black block letters, "Six-Armed Menace Kills Punisher, Spider-Man Unmasked as a Monster." Jameson's voice rattled the glass in his office windows. "What did I tell you? I've been saying it for years. This wall-crawling menace was just waiting for the right moment to show his true colors. Now he's killed one of the city's only real vigilantes." Across the newsroom, Robbie Robertson's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He'd seen the good Spider-Man could do, but the photo in the paper, blurry, grainy, yet unmistakable, showed something else entirely. A crouched silhouette, 6 arms, eyes glowing in the camera flash like an animal caught in headlights. Miles away, in the decaying shadows of a condemned warehouse on the Lower East Side, Peter sat slumped against a wall. His mask lay in a crumpled heap beside him, its lenses cracked. His skin was pale, slick with sweat, and his body ached in ways he couldn't name. The new arms moved restlessly, scraping their claws across the concrete floor like they had minds of their own. The scent of dust and mildew was heavy in his nostrils, but beneath it was something else, something warm, metallic. His stomach growled, and the sound startled him because it didn't feel like hunger for food. It felt primal, like a predator catching a scent on the wind. The sound of boots on metal rang out from above. Peter's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. A shadow dropped through the open skylight, landing in a crouch. The figure stood, revealing a long coat, dark glasses, and the glint of silver-edged steel. Blade. The vampire hunter's voice was calm, but laced with threat. "I've been tracking the scent of Morbius's enzyme across this city, Spider. Thought I'd finished my work when he vanished. But then I hear there's a 6-armed killer running around. Guess my job isn't over yet." Peter rose slowly, holding up his hands, all 6 of them. "Blade, it's me. I'm not..." The growl that replaced his voice made Blade's grip tighten on the hilt of his sword. "Save it. Whatever you are, you're not Spider-Man anymore." The fight exploded into motion. Blade struck first, his blade whistling through the air, forcing Peter into a backward roll. One of the new arms lashed out instinctively, catching Blade across the chest and hurling him into a stack of crates. The wood splintered on impact, and Blade rolled to his feet, spitting blood. "You're faster," he admitted, circling. "Stronger, doesn't matter. I've killed worse." They clashed again, steel against claw, each blow echoing in the hollow warehouse. Peter's movements grew wilder, less controlled, each strike driven by an anger he didn't fully understand. In one desperate dodge, Blade's foot caught on the jagged edge of a broken window pane. His balance shifted, and in a blink, he was through it, his body tumbling into the alley 3 stories below. Peter's heart dropped as he heard the crunch of bone against pavement. He crawled to the window, looking down at the still form in the spreading pool of red. "Another accident," he whispered to no one. But the words felt hollow, like an excuse he'd stopped believing. By nightfall, the city was in a panic. News vans lined the streets, their antennas clawing at the sky. The NYPD announced curfews in several boroughs, citing an ongoing metahuman threat. In the Bugle's basement, Jameson recorded another furious broadcast. The so-called friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is a menace no more. He's a murderer. First the Punisher, now another vigilante dead. How many more before someone stops him? In a small bar north of the city, the news played on a flickering television. A man in a battered leather jacket sat hunched over a beer, cigar smoke curling from his lips. He watched the shaky footage. A six-armed silhouette scaling the side of a warehouse. And his eyes narrowed. Logan had seen that gait before, heard that rhythm of movement. He didn't know the man's name, didn't know the face under the mask, but he knew the Spider. He'd fought alongside him once when the X-Men had been pulled into the chaos of mutant hysteria in New York. The kid had been fast, sharp-witted, and annoyingly optimistic. This wasn't him. Logan crushed his cigar out in the ashtray and stood, pulling his jacket tight against the cold. "Guess I'm taking a trip to the city," he muttered. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of Queens, Mary Jane Watson sat at her bedroom window, staring at the skyline. The phone sat silent on her nightstand. She'd called Peter's apartment 3 times today, left messages that went unanswered. Her gut twisted with the fear she'd felt before, when he'd vanished during the Morbius ordeal. But this felt different, worse. Somewhere deep down, she knew he was out there, and she knew he was in trouble. The fog rolled in from the Hudson like a living thing, swallowing the dockyard's iron skeletons and the rust-stained pylons that jutted from dark water. Cargo cranes loomed as black, headless giants, and sodium lights buzzed in tired halos over salt-bitten concrete. Spider-Man moved among the shadows with a skittering grace that frightened even him. 6 limbs finding balance where there was none. Body heat shimmering off his suit. Breath whistling through a throat that felt narrower by the hour. Somewhere behind his lenses, his eyes were grainy with sleeplessness. He'd spent the afternoon evading police scanners, leaping alley to alley until the city's noise blurred into one long siren. Every time he blinked, he saw Frank Castle's broken silhouette. Every time he swallowed, he tasted copper and remembered the way Blade's coat fluttered through broken glass, then didn't flutter at all. The serum's failure pulsed through him like a drumbeat. Crawford had warned him about neogenic instability. Kraven had forced him to face the beast once before. He had clawed his way back to human then. Tonight, Manhattan's damp wind seemed to whisper that those days were gone. A soft scrape of boot leather carried through the mist. The sound was unhurried, confident. Spider-Man turned, all 6 hands splaying like a spooked animal bracing for a strike. From a gap between stacked shipping containers stepped a man in a scuffed leather jacket, hair wild as bramble, shoulders set for a fight he didn't want, but had already accepted. The metal rasp of claws telescoping into moonlight cut the night, cleaner than any siren. "Didn't want it to be you, kid," Logan said, voice low, almost conversational, like 2 men meeting on a smoke break instead of a killing floor. "But I hear a 6-armed predators tearing up my old stomping grounds. I followed the scent. It's yours." He cocked his chin toward the river. "You remember me. We've bled together. X-Men business. You saved people then." He took another step, palms open, claws still out, but angled away. "Look at me, webhead. I ain't here to gut ya. I'm here to see if there's anything left to pull back from the edge." He did remember. The Canadian's voice threaded through the static in his skull, carrying flashes of blue and gold uniforms. A steel-walled mansion full of students. A day when he'd been treated like an ally instead of a freak. He remembered Logan's grudging respect, the way the man had called him a pain in the neck, but a good kid. When he thought Spider-Man couldn't hear, he wanted to answer that memory, to say, "I'm still here." But what came out was a hiss that steamed his lenses. Words felt like threads slipping through thick gloves. "Don't," he managed, And then the new arms coiled without orders, hauling him forward on a lunge he hadn't meant to make. Logan pivoted, fast, and the first clash sang off adamantium. Webbed knuckles wrapped bone metal, sparks sprayed from a container wall. Spidey vaulted over a low bollard. Logan's claws gouged a ribbon of sparks across a steel door. Their shadows flickered and overlapped in the sodium haze. Two predators testing range. Back it down, Logan grated, circling. I know what mutation does to a man. I've had it screaming in my blood longer than you've been breathing. But you make this hard. I'll do what I gotta. Spider-Man skittered sideways on four limbs and rose with two, stance shifting between human and arachnid like a faulty signal. I never wanted... The sentence broke into a ragged snarl. A police helicopter thudded somewhere inland, and the brief strobe of its searchlight knifed across the docks, bathing them both in a hard white blink. Spider-Man flinched, his pupils, already blown wide, slammed shut against the glare. An instinct tore through him with a single imperative command. Attack! He sprang, four hands seizing a gantry, two lashing for Logan's shoulders. The Canadian dropped under the strike, rolled, and came up with a forearm block that drove bone against Spider-Man's sternum. The impact rang his ribs like a bell. For a second, Peter felt the old rhythm. The calculus of angles. The mercy built into every strike. Then the new arms dragged him past it, bending the math toward damage. They slammed through a stack of palletized barrels, blue liquid glugging through split seams, chemical sting burning their eyes. Logan coughed, swore through clenched teeth, and slashed a pipe that hissed steam into the fog, buying himself a screen. Spider-Man burst through it, a silhouette with too many elbows, and punted Logan across a crate top with a kick that would have shattered a lamppost. The Canadian hit, rolled, and let the fall spend itself through his spine, the way a man learns to after decades of hard landings. You're fast, he muttered, spitting chemical taste onto the concrete. Faster than last time. Stronger, too. His eyes narrowed. But you ain't listening. For one suspended heartbeat, Spider-Man did. He stopped, panting, hands trembling in an ugly bouquet. Logan's voice softened, the rough sand in it settling into something as close to kind as it ever got. There's a doc who helped you before. Craven, Crawford. You know the names. We can walk out of here, kid. You keep breathing, you got a chance. But you push me, and that chance ends under these lights. The words reached him. Doc, helped, chance, and some human part of Peter latched on. In that narrow window, memory slipped between the fangs. Aunt May's laugh over morning tea, MJ's perfume on a scarf tossed over the back of a chair. The old Midtown rooftop where he'd first believed he could be something better than a bullied kid with bad luck. He raised one shaking hand, palm out. He whispered, voice threadbare. The helicopter swung back. A bullhorn barked. On the ground, hands where we can see them. A sniper's laser jittered through fog and painted a trembling ruby dot across Spider-Man's chest. The spider in him saw the dot, not the man who wore it. Survival detonated the piece. He came on like a storm. Logan met him because there was no space left for talk. The fight narrowed to bone and breath. Webs snapped across claws. Claws sheared webs to ribbons. A knee cracked against rib. A forearm hooked a neck, both men moving with the speed of people who had lost too much to lose time. Spider-Man smashed a crane control box, and the boom jerked, swinging slow iron over the water. Logan ducked, the hook screamed past, tearing a gash in a container that vomited coils of copper. They hit a patch of oil and skidded. Logan caught himself with one hand, the other hand's claws scoring 3 glittering commas across the concrete. He didn't want to cut. Everything in his stance tried not to. But the kid's new arms kept coming, raking and hammering with the blind insistence of reflex. One hand found Logan's throat. Pressure built. Blood beat at Logan's temples like a drum. His peripheral vision contracted to a tunnel. Pale lenses, black lines, 6 hands, 6. He barked the last warning he had. Don't make me do it. Spider-Man's reply was a reflexive slash meant to silence the future. The motion was automatic. The kind of kill arc predators inherit from things that crawled in the dark before men had words. It was fast, and there wouldn't be a second try. Wolverine chose in a space smaller than a blink. The claws that had stayed caged by will and memory shot straight, true and final. 3 lines of impossible metal crossed the red of Spider-Man's chest and found a heart that had broken itself trying to stay human. The impact was quiet. A gasp, a hitch. The soft sound bodies make when strength leaves them. The new arms lifted once, fluttering like severed marionette strings, then sagged. Spider-Man folded against Logan's shoulder, shockingly light, shockingly young, and slid to the concrete in a careful, reluctant cradle. For a few beats, only the river spoke. Murmur against pylons, a gull's sharp punctuation, the faraway helicopter wumping out of range now that the threat had fallen still. Logan knelt and eased him flat, hands bare now, claws retracted with a weary hiss. The mask was still on, lenses cracked, the black webbing glistening under the dock lights. Logan didn't reach for it. He didn't want to know the face. He didn't want to make a stranger into a ghost he'd have to see when he shaved. He leaned close because the kid's mouth moved barely. Tell, the voice rasped, shredded, and very human. Tell MJ, I'm sorry. Logan's jaw flexed. He didn't know who MJ was, a code name, a girl, a promise. He nodded anyway, because you honor last requests even when you can't deliver them. Yeah, kid, he said quietly. I'll tell her. The police came on in a rush of boots and drawn guns, and Logan stood without raising his hands. He didn't need to. Something in the scene, his posture, the stillness of the body at his feet, the palpable end of violence, bled the urgency out of the first wave. Orders clipped through radios. Perimeter men exhaled into their collars. A sergeant with gray at his temples took a step forward, took in the 6 arms splayed on cold concrete, and swallowed. Is it over? He asked, as if the answer might change if he said the word wrong. Yeah, Logan said. It's over. He walked past them without looking back. One officer started to lift a hand toward his shoulder, then let it drop. There are men you do not ask for badges, and nights you do not write down in full sentences. Morning broke without warmth. The bugle ran a photo of a shrouded shape on a gurney and called it victory. 6 armed menace stopped at last. Jameson, ruddy with triumph, recorded a breathless editorial about civic safety and the dangers of masked vigilantes, declaring the city free of a nightmare at last. Robbie stood in the doorway, a file clutched in his hands, and watched the red light on the camera wink out. He didn't say what he was thinking. That sometimes nightmares wore blue suits and cheered into microphones. In Queens, Aunt May sat at the edge of her bed. The morning news, a thin voice from the television across the hall. Spider-Man killed in confrontation at the Hudson River docks, the anchor said, with the neutral cadence of airless rooms. May's hand hovered above a framed photograph of a much younger Peter, his tie crooked, his smile shy. She straightened the frame, a small domestic kindness, and told herself he'd call this evening and apologize for missing dinner. He always did. In a walk-up apartment not far away, MJ held a tattered red mask that she'd once found abandoned and later returned, a secret token of faith. She pressed it to her chest and stared at the city's shining grid out the window. She didn't know why the air felt thinner today, only that something in her had been standing on the edge all week, and now it had stepped off. Logan lingered on a midtown rooftop until the sun burned the fog into ordinary sky. He lit a cigar and let it go out between his fingers without taking a drag. There are some smells you don't add to a morning like this. He was just a kid, he said to nobody, and the city ate the words the way it eats everything. Sirens and laughter and last confessions and all. Downriver, a plain cloth draped an unmarked slab. No name, no dates. Just the quiet, salt-wet wind combing the river's skin. Somewhere a bell on a tug moaned once and fell silent. Manhattan, never a place to stop for long, moved on. By nightfall, the dockyard was empty again. The crane arm hung where the broken control had left it, a crooked finger pointing at nothing. In a puddle stained with chemicals and starlight, a thin strand of web drifted and dissolved, as delicate as the line that had once held a city above its worst fears. In the apartment on Ingram Street, a phone did not ring. In the newsroom, a headline aged an hour and felt ancient. In the places between lamp glow and alley mouth, people told each other that the menace was gone, and believed it because belief is cheaper than grief. And on a high steel beam where gulls nested in the river threw light onto the undersides of things, a man with hands he could not change closed his eyes and pictured a kid who'd cracked jokes in the middle of chaos, who had saved strangers without asking their names, who had called him sir once with a crooked grin. He didn't know the face under the mask. He didn't want to. He wanted to carry only this, the shape of a hero in motion, and the weight of doing what couldn't be left undone. Weeks had passed, but the city didn't feel safer. Headlines had moved on to scandals at Oscorp and political wrangling at City Hall. But in late-night diners and crowded subway cars, people still whispered about the six-armed creature that had stalked Manhattan's rooftops. To the world, Spider-Man was gone. A menace destroyed before he could claim more lives. Jonah Jameson wore his victory like a crown, his editorials smug with vindication. But for those who had glimpsed the man beneath the mask, the story felt unfinished, a wound that would never close. Mary Jane Watson sat on a bench in Central Park, the autumn wind tugging at her red hair. In her hands, she clutched a simple bouquet of roses, their petals curling at the edges in the chill. She had heard the rumors from a police officer she trusted, that the body of the so-called man-spider had been buried quietly, unmarked, on the outskirts of Potter's Field. No name, no ceremony, no chance for closure. The city would never know. But she knew. She didn't have proof, no mask or confession, only instinct. She had always known, and that knowledge was its own kind of torment. She laid the roses gently on the cold grass, whispering words she wasn't sure would ever be heard. You were more than what they saw. You were Peter, and I'll never forget you. Across the city, Aunt May dusted the framed photo of her nephew on the mantle. She smiled sadly at the boy, frozen in time. Awkward tie, nervous grin. She wondered where he'd gone. He hadn't come home in days. The phone calls had stopped. The world told her Spider-Man was dead, and though she would never have admitted it aloud, some part of her had always suspected Peter carried burdens no young man should. She stared at the photograph a long time before whispering, "Wherever you are, my dear boy, I hope you finally found peace." She turned off the television just as Jonah's latest tirade filled the screen, sparing herself another wave of bitterness. High above, on the skeletal girders of an unfinished skyscraper, Wolverine crouched, a cigar unlit between his fingers. He hadn't told anyone what had happened on the docks. Not the X-Men, not Charles, not even himself really. He carried it like all the other weights he never spoke of. The kid had been a fighter, a survivor, and, in another world, maybe even a teammate. Logan replayed the last words over and over, like a record needle stuck in a groove. Tell MJ I'm sorry. He didn't know the girl, but he'd seen the look in Spider-Man's eyes. It was love, the kind that made a man claw his way back from the brink, or die trying. Logan closed his eyes against the wind and muttered, "I told her, kid." One way or another, the words vanished into the night, carried off over the glittering city. And so, New York moved on. Children played on sidewalks, couples argued in cafes. The subways thundered beneath the streets. But somewhere in the rhythm of it all, there was an absence, a hole no headline could fill. The city had lost a hero it never truly understood, and the man behind the mask was buried not in parades or monuments, but in silence. Only those who had loved him carried the truth, and only they knew that behind the monster the world reviled, there had once been a boy named Peter Parker, who had tried to do the right thing until the very end.